This is PTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali. You are watching Faultlines. In this program, we discuss various political events from around the world. The topic for today's program is the presidential changeover in White House. Joe Biden is going to take charge as 46th President of the United States on 20th January. But this time, White House has far more challenges than ever before. The political temperature of the country has gone very high. There are challenges in foreign policy, where old partners like France and Germany are now distancing themselves from the United States. Partners like China are today in Cold War, and the international spectrum of politics is very challenging. We have to find out how President Biden is going to address these challenges, and I am joined by a worthy panel of speakers who are going to give me an in-depth analysis on this subject. So my first guest for today's program is Dr. Talat Shabir, who's Director of China-Pakistan Studies Center. Sir, welcome to the program. Retired Ambassador Sanau Lamia, he has stayed Pakistan Ambassador on various assignments. He is going to tell us about that as well. I have Dr. Adil Najam from Boston University, and over the phone I have Mr. Tom O'Connor, award-winning writer for Newsweek and expert on U.S. foreign policy. Dr. Adil, do you foresee any changes in U.S. foreign policy under Biden?
I do not think that Mr. Biden is going to find it very easy to fix the problems in international affairs and foreign relations that Mr. Trump has caused, partly because many of those problems have deeper roots than just Mr. Trump, and largely because those are not easy problems to fix. These are not going to be easy. First of all, Mr. Biden is going to be totally weighed down by the domestic problems, by the domestic divide that we've been seeing in this week, for example. And that's going to be priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And foreign affairs is going to be secondary. On the other hand, the blow to U.S. moral legitimacy abroad, in some ways, made by Mr. Trump, but which was already in the works. The wars of the 1990s, the 2000s, have weighed very heavily on U.S. international moral legitimacy, and that will be difficult for Mr. Biden to rebuild. Now, he's very well placed to do so, or to try to do so, because he has spent a lifetime in foreign affairs, and he's an old school foreign affairs person who believes in American exceptionalism, who believes in asserting moral value, who believes in multilateralism. So we will certainly see him trying, and I think many in the world will be very pleased to finally again have a US leader who is not abusing them, who is not talking down to them. But that does not mean that these wounds are going to heal easy. And simply the change of face in Washington is going to change things entirely. However, stylistically, it will be a huge difference. It will be day and night. The diplomacy by Twitter, which isn't even diplomacy, the talking down to other countries, is that Mr. Trump had been doing, which I think sort of pushed a lot of people sort of away from U.S. influence, will change quite dramatically, and Mr. Biden will try to bank on that, but it shall not be easy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shab. Tom, what is your take on the problems of Trump's foreign policy that Biden has to fix?
Hey, Shabahat, thank you so much for having me on your program. It's a real pleasure. A great question. President-elect Joe Biden has a lot of foreign policy hurdles he has to overcome, left behind by President Donald Trump. They're not few. The number one issue, I would say, in my mind, that Biden has to address is their relationship with China. It's reaching a crisis point, both in geopolitics and in trade. I think that Biden will opt for a relationship that's both professional and competitive. China is a country that's not going anywhere. It's a country that the U.S. has to deal with in multiple fields. And I think that he has to go for a relationship that he can have a working relationship with the People's Republic. But that's an issue that will take some time to fix. It's going to be an ongoing issue that he'll have to face throughout his term. The number one most pressing issue when it comes to timeline is re-entering the JCPOA. Biden has said he will re-enter the nuclear deal, first struck in 2015, went into force early 2016. This is something that is very pressing because the Rouhani administration in Iran is departing, and the room for negotiations with his current administration, which has contacts, Obviously, in the Biden/Obama administrations, this is something he has to face right away. Beyond that, North Korea negotiations, inheriting an unprecedented peace process, Cuba relations, normalizing those relations, and overall just rebuilding the State Department.
Thank you very much, Tom. And Dr. Thalit, we have seen the response from the two sides, and they believe that widely the policy with China is a major shift that is required. What's your take on it?
Generally, if you see various presidents that come in United States, generally the policy remains the same. Of course, the personality cult definitely, has some difference, makes some difference with regards to policies that you see in the world. But in my opinion, the difference between Joe Biden and Trump would be one that Joe Biden will not resort to firebrand tweeting, of course, and there was very aggressive foreign policy. And he was very bold in expressing what he thought about how America should behave as a matter of policy to the entire world. But I think during Trump, a lot of mess was created with regards to relations with various countries, particularly with China, and the major power conflict, rose in the times of Trump. The big challenge for Joe Biden will be to fix those problems. I agree, he will be quite different from, of course, Trump, because he would take advice from sane people, and he would act, as I said, he won't be a firebrand leader of United States. But generally, I think, for instance, with regards to China, the conflict with China is now structural. It has become, of course, in international relations, conflicts and looking after interests has become structural, and countries will continue to have this conflict. Like United States with regards to China will continue to have this conflict, but of course Joe Biden will try to fix some of the problems, like climate change, like trade friction that both countries have. They will definitely, but world will definitely see a major sea change from Trump to Joe Biden. But generally, the policies of America will continue to be the same as we saw in Trump. Of course, there'll be a saner, tinge to what Joe Biden will be doing during his term.
So now, Sab, with your experience as a former diplomat for Pakistan, do you see was there an actual meltdown in the soft power that United States has had on the world due to this foreign policy shift that we saw during the Trump time? And do you see any changes coming in that?
Basically, as stated earlier by my colleagues, there would not be a big major shift in substance. Yes, Trumpism has damaged the global status of the US and also alienated US from its own allies. But the policies are deep rooted. It would be difficult for Biden, despite its vast experience in foreign policy and longest period as a congressman, as a senator, as a vice president, and his associations with foreign policy. He would be unable to bring root out, I would say, Trumpism, Trump's policies quickly. His emphasis or primary focus would remain healing the nation, domestic issues. Then he has to deal with its own neighbors, say Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, where they still have rightist or central rightist governments. Then it comes to global issues. I would say healing its U.S. relations with its own allies, that is the West. Then he has to deal with Russia. I think his occupation with Russia would be more serious.
You don't see a major meltdown with the gaps that we have with China for now, but you think that it's going to change slightly or symbolically. Dr. Adil, I'm coming back to you. Tell me about the relationship between India and United States. As we see that United States is using India to curtail China in this region, do you think any shift on this policy is going to happen?
China and US relations are certainly going to be, are already one of the defining frameworks of all international politics. They are going to become increasingly important in terms of global relations between these two major powers. In some ways, it's not a question of whether India or Pakistan, for that matter, goes against one or for one. It is where they see their own national interest within the evolving, changing global shape. So I think we clearly at this point see the US viewing India as a much more reliable partner in terms of China, basically on the principle of an enemy's enemy is a friend. But India itself has her own interests, and those interests include the fact that China is a neighbor and the US is far away. The US is still a major power. There's a major diaspora in the US. US has great interest in India. So what I foresee is a continuing of US India relations becoming stronger for many, many reasons, one of which happens to be China. But it is not simply that India would be wanting to be seen as a pawn in the great game between China and the US, because that wouldn't be in India's interest. It wouldn't be in the US interest, even though they may seem to press in that direction, and it certainly also wouldn't be in China's interest. So in many ways, as the world changes very rapidly, and then we are in this very dynamic period, a lot is going to depend on how that dynamic shift between the two great powers of our time, China and the US, plays out, and then India with her own 1 billion people, how that plays out with both of those countries, and including in the Quad in Asia, which is going to play an important and increasingly important role in US politics.
Dr. Adil, thank you very much for your take. But Tom, what do you think on this augmenting of relationship between India and United States that Dr. Adil has referred to? Do you think it's going to be augmented further with Biden coming to the office, or you foresee a change coming in this relationship?
The U.S.-India gradual alignment, it predates President Trump. Clearly, it was accelerated in the past 4 years, especially since the revival of the quadrilateral security dialogue, also including Japan and Australia. We have to be precise when we describe this pseudo-alliance, if you will, as it's far from a Pacific NATO. It's not quite there yet, or maybe it will never be there. But at the same time, it's very much giving these signals to China that there's some regional bloc building going on with some of its most powerful neighbors. India, of course, is a traditionally non-aligned power, closer to Russia even, the Soviet Union back in the day during the Cold War, but it's increasingly embracing the West, and that doesn't seem to be changing. It's hard to see that trend reversing. At the same time, there has to be realization that a larger confrontation in Asia needs to be treated as an existential threat to the world. There has to be greater attention paid to this, and that goes for the line of actual control between India and China. It also goes for the line of control between India and Pakistan. And it's clear that India sees Kashmir sort of as China sees Xinjiang, that there's a human rights issue there, a sovereignty issue. But at the same time, it's the line of control is very much an international border dispute. And the U.S. would probably do very well to engage both sides of the conflict, both Pakistan and India, engage both partners diplomatically, economically, and the security realm as well.
Dr. Tilit, with the United States and India, as we have understood from this conversation, are not drifting away. Pakistan still have Afghanistan and neighbor, where United States is pretty insistent to give India a dominant role in Afghanistan. Do you see this diluting anywhere for Pakistan, or are we going to be in more tighter of a spot?
I think when we talk of India, because there's a kind of Pakistan requires kind of a balancing between the US and China. India does not have that kind of problem. India is clearly in the US camp, one. We expect Joe Biden to do little more on human rights violations that are taking place in Kashmir. But beyond that, we should not expect anything big from Joe Biden with regards to India. India, the Americans have interest with India. India is a big economy. India is a big country. India is a so-called big democracy. So the interest that US has with India are greater than interest that US has with Pakistan, one. When you go through literature on US-India relations, many Indian scholars believe that it's not wise to be projected as China's enemy in the region, because India is also mindful of the fact that China is a growing power, growing superpower. So at some place, though they have clashes, but at some stage they need to have a relationship of cordiality with China. So largely, I don't expect any big change in India-China, US-India equation, though I think the friction between India and China will continue. Of course, we are a very important country with regards to Afghanistan. US at the moment needs us to resolve the issue of Afghanistan, and we can also play our greater role in the peace process that is taking place in Afghanistan. But with regard to this equation in US, India, China, things will continue to be the same. And I don't think I don't think Biden will, be giving more leverage or more space to what Pakistan wants America to help us with regards, particularly with regards to Kashmir issue.
Ambassador, your quick take on that.
What Dr. Saab has just said, I would simply add to it. But one issue is, how do you define your own geopolitical needs and your own aspirations? US has already made a decision that India is going to be a strategic partner. We cannot replace that concept. Biden or no Biden, or anybody else, any other leader, if he replaces him, or whether she, the vice president or somebody else. So the situation would remain so. One should not expect more. You have, diplomacy is a process. You have to define your own commitment, and you have to define the area around you and your strategic needs. You have decided, and it has been proven, that your strategic benefits lies with China. So you have the need and you have the requirement to strengthen it further, not at the cost of other countries. America is a powerful country, remains still very powerful country, and has been a friendly country. So we need to cultivate our relationship with them.
There's a valid point from your side, and I'd like to take the opinion from Dr. Adil. Dr. Adil, Kamala Harris, being the vice president this time, has an Indian background, and I believe that there are concerns in Islamabad regarding it. What is your opinion on her role as vice president, as well as having this Indian background?
On Kamala Harris, she clearly does have Indian heritage in her past, but she also has African American heritage in her past, which is far more important for her politically in her identity within U.S. politics than probably her Indian heritage. But let us remember this: she has been elected to be the vice president of the United States of America. She's not been elected to be the vice president for South Asia affairs, or the vice president for Indian Americans, or the vice president for South Asian relations. She is going to focus on domestic issues, because that's the people who vote for her. People didn't vote for her because she was of Indian origin. They voted for her as a woman. They voted for her as a political leader within the US, for national issues, for issues of diversity, and that's where her focus will be. So I do not see any direct or intentional influence in terms of policy related to India. What I do see is that, of course, when you have someone in a leadership position who comes from a certain heritage, they have greater knowledge of it. They have a certain set of ideas about it, and those seep in, whether intentionally or not, in the conversation. There is a lot of Indian diaspora within Mr. Biden's cabinet, within Mr. Biden's leadership, and that too is coming from what is happening within the U.S. Body politics. It's not about U.S. and India relations. It's not really about India or Pakistan relations by any stretch. It's mostly about the changing face of the United States, in which the Indian diaspora is now a major part and a major player. So those are the things we are going to see, as opposed to any form of intentional interference. In fact, if anything, Ms. Harris. Or Vice President Harris now, will try very hard to be seen as the American, not just even a minority person, but as another American, because she intends to run for president in the next elections. Mr. Biden is probably not going to be running in 2024 because of his age. She will clearly be the starting front runner as someone who had also ran for president the last time. So her eyes are not going to be on, what can I do for India? I really do not think that's how it's going to go. It is her eye, and the prize her eye will be on is the presidency of the United States, but most immediately again in dealing with the very real domestic problems that her government will be facing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adil. Tell me about this Kashmir issue, because Biden during his campaign has been very vocal about the violation of human rights in Kashmir. And the Muslims for Biden have expressed this on their website, that they have got more than 1 million Muslim votes, primarily because of what Trump has been against the Muslims and what Biden has been as a softer face. Do you think both of these points are going to have some supplementary effect? I mean, is going to add more on to the Kashmir cause like we just recently saw in the UK's parliament? Or would he just stay silent and would keep acting symbolically?
Right. I think there is a difference of opinion in the scholarship of America about how Modi is dealing with Kashmir issue. Many unconstitutional changes that he made in occupied Kashmir are people are apprehensive about it in America. There are matters of civil liberties. There are matter of constitutional rights. So I think these phrases would be discussed in the American discourse. And human rights issue, human rights problems, human rights violations will be discussed in the discourse in American, academic as well as maybe government circles. But there won't be any major change expected in the thought process inside Washington D.C. because as we have already discussed, there are strategic interests linked to India. And probably the way Indians are behaving, the way Modi government is behaving is just suiting what the US actually want in South Asia. So we should not, we can just hope that Biden expresses some solidarity with the people who are suffering for the last couple of decades. Not more than that. I think it would be very hard to expect Biden, coming all out for support in Kashmir cause. I think UK case is different because UK has responsibility somewhat to resolve this issue because they created this issue for South Asia, to important South Asian nations. So the Americans, they do not have such, other than human rights issue, because human rights are discussed inside America.
Ambassador, the way Prime Minister Imran Khan described this Kashmir issue in the United Nations General Assembly, do you think it has affected or it has had some influence on the world leaders, or anything is going to change about the perspective on Kashmir as the world sees it?
I wish it could have, but speeches made in the UN stays with there, they have flashy impact. Foreign policy decisions are subject to national interest, geopolitics, geoeconomics now, geotrading, that kind of things. So it did not, though it was a fantastic, very good, very committed, very focused speech and statement. And it inspired people. It motivated people, but the limit, it was limited in influence. It was not the one which really influenced the thinking of the people.
Dr. Adil, your quick take on this. As you have heard, our panelists have a different opinion on this. They're not very excited about changes coming to the Kashmir cause from the United States. Do you agree to this?
On Kashmir, but also on all matters related to South Asia, to Pakistan, to India, especially to Afghanistan. Mr. Biden is very well informed. He spent a lifetime working on foreign policy issues. He knows about this region, he knows about its complexities, about its history. So I do think that when he talks about Kashmir, he is not just trying to court voters, though I'm sure he's also doing that. He really does understand the issue. But I do think we need to be honest with ourselves. When someone mentions Kashmir, that does not mean they are saying the same thing that we in Pakistan might be saying. Mr. Biden is reacting to the Indian government's high-handedness in the valley, in the change of rules, but mostly he is reacting to the uproar within India by Indians, more liberal Indians, around Kashmir as well as the rest of the country on the high-handed policies of Mr. Modi. So just because he is speaking against those policies does not mean that he is in some ways changing US position on Pakistan's point of view on Kashmir. And I think we make a mistake by trying to conflate those two things. I think this US government will be very concerned about the state of human rights in India, particularly with the types of policies Mr. Modi has been propagating. But that is mostly coming not just because Pakistan is making sounds, which it might have an influence, but that is mostly coming from pressure from within India, including by Indians within the US. So I think that's the context that we should be very, very careful. I do not think that you're going to see something like Mr. Biden saying, "Okay, let me come and solve Kashmir for you," or saying that I think that Pakistan's position is one that we are going to support against the Indian position on Kashmir. That is not on the cards, and I do not see that happening, especially because this Biden administration is mostly going to be focused on its very serious domestic problems, and everything foreign affairs is going to take a backseat.
After the domestic problem, the major issues for United States are relating to its foreign policy, and particularly the relationship with the European Union, specifically with France and Germany, has badly spoiled. Tom, what is your opinion about this relationship between United States and EU becoming worse in Trump's era? Do you think any immediate changes coming to it?
So I think the European Union will see a greater partner in Joe Biden, something they're more traditionally used to. But I think that one thing that has to be clear is that Biden will not be facing the same sort of international community atmosphere as either Obama or Trump did when coming to office, vis-a-vis the EU specifically, of course. The EU has learned to some degree that it must act independently from the US. It must diversify its portfolio. The EU has a massive economy collectively, a massive population collectively, a massive military collectively. It's not a vassal state of the US. So I think the Biden administration learned this the hard way when the EU struck an investment deal with China just last month, I believe it was. This followed China surpassing the US as the EU's top trading partner. These are not signs of weakness for the EU. These are signs of essentially the EU saying, you know, we're going to deal with you. There's a natural transatlantic alliance there. That's very important. That's not going away anytime soon. But at the same time, partners negotiate. And that's something that the Biden administration will have to deal with going forward.
Ambassador, the relationship between European Union and United States, you heard what Tom said. Do you think any changes are coming in here, or do you think a stalemate is destined now?
No, I would tend to support and agree with Mr. Tom's views. There would be a change, and there are areas where we will see cooperation growing, frankly, climate change, posturing, and trading. And the best is that the interstate relationship would be positive. Negativity element would start vanishing. Of course, these processes are slow, but you will see it. It would be quite visible on global level. And then people would start talking about Western alliance again. It would not be a divided house as it was during Trump's period.
Dr. Talat, I'll come back to the problems with Afghanistan, where the United States want Pakistan to have an assertive role and as well as want to give India, as I said earlier, a strong role in there. The problem with Pakistan is that we have been abandoned in Afghanistan by United States before. So how much can we trust to this new administration? If a peace deal is signed and after a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, what are the guarantees that we will not be abandoned again? Because now, evidently, US has more interest in the region with its contacts with India establishing further.
The Afghanistan issue is a very complex issue at the moment. There are various factions that are, fighting for their piece of cake inside Afghanistan. Every faction, government or opposition or Taliban, and many factions inside Taliban, they see peace process from their own particular prism. So it's a very complex situation. I don't see anything happening very soon with regards to peace process in Afghanistan because it's a very complex one. Indian influence in Afghanistan rose manifold during last 1 decade and post 9/11 era, and that is counterproductive to what we actually wanted to do in Afghanistan. There's a kind of mistrust prevailing in with regards to Afghanistan between Pakistan, US, India, and Afghanistan too. But the stakeholders realize that Pakistan is a very important country who can help bring peace inside Afghanistan, and we have been trying. There are a couple of high-profile visits from Afghanistan to Pakistan. Pakistan is trying to engage all factions across the board. So maybe in the past we also had some selective engagement, but now we are having across the board, and Pakistan supports across the board broad-based peace process but it's very complex situation. The distrust that parties, stakeholders have, I think this will continue for some time, and because countries have diverse interests, they have conflicting interests inside Afghanistan. So let's hope and pray that the things get better in Afghanistan, but I think situation will continue for some time to be very complex.
Ambassador, do you agree America actually wants to get out of Afghanistan and do not keep a symbolic presence in the region to counter the influence of China?
I would not agree with that. Though US does not need to be physically present in Afghanistan, they have the wherewithal to do whatever they want to do. What are their aims? They can achieve it by sitting somewhere else too. If you look at their presence around in the region, you will agree with me readily. But the issue is the Biden is more responsible a leader than Trump. He is a politician. He believes in negotiations. He like any good statesman or politician, he would seek a negotiated solution. But as has been stated, it is a complex situation, and options are very narrow.
Dr. Adil, I'm coming back to you with my last question. Tell me about this health crisis. US has more than 300,000 reported deaths due to COVID. And despite the fact US has abandoned WHO, do you think WHO and United States are going to work together in the near future? Because this is an imminent question for the rest of the world.
I do think that we will immediately, maybe even on the 20th in his inaugural address, see the US returning to the WHO. We will certainly see the US being much more multilateral comparative to Mr. Trump. We will see the US returning to the climate agreement, to the Paris Accord, to the UNFCCC, to international organizations, to United Nations. So in comparison to Mr. Trump, we will see an immediate change. But remember this, the US has not been a very strong multilateralist player for many years. The US has been dragging its feet on many things well before Mr. Trump, even in Obama's days, even in George Bush's days. So in a way, if the US returns to something, it's going to return to pre-Trump. It's not going to return to somehow becoming a Wilsonian or the US like it was in the 1960s or maybe even 70s. So we should not be expecting that sort of a change. Now, in terms of health and COVID and WHO, I think the US will return to WHO, but the US was not putting in that much money in international health via the WHO. Most of it was coming through initiatives like from Bill Gates and others. That I think will return. But I think the time of looking at the US as the Maibap, as the Chaudhry that's going to come and save and give money to the poor countries has been long past, well before Trump. And I think people who talk about that are missing what's been happening not just in the last 4 years, but 10 and 20 years. So, yes, the US clearly will be a more multilateral player, but that is mostly in comparison to where Mr. Trump had taken it. So even in coming back, do not expect that suddenly the US will be the greatest multilateral player, which it hasn't been. It has been in size and maybe even money, but not in intent and the type of leadership that sometimes comes, for example, from Europe and now sometimes even from China. So I think multilateralism, we will see a major difference, but the way to gauge that difference, like every other difference, is in comparison to Mr. Trump rather than in some absolute form.
Dr. Thaler, the world is looking towards United States and then China. China is today leading in technology in many other areas, particularly in the war against COVID. China is clearly on the lead. Do you think the world requires more of synergy between China and the United States in the fight against COVID specifically, and do you see this happening?
Right. I think this is very important. Like when we see China and America, growing tense over trade issue. This is the world worries about it, and I think the developing world will particularly will be harmed if these two countries continue to get into sort of conflicting situation. With regards to COVID and WHO you talked about, I think Biden will immediately, I agree with Dr. Najam, will get back to the WHO. But you can't expect much from America. He's also right when he says that the time that America used to help the poor countries, developing countries, is past. The story of past. But it is very important for both the countries to be responsible, I think, in the interest of the world peace, to come to cooperating terms on the issues like climate change, like trade, like COVID, international health. The world is poor. The developing world is grappling with this issue of COVID, but they cannot tackle this issue because it's huge and massive in terms of its gravity. So I think the developing world looks to China as well as US for a very important role in international health.
Ambassador, this Chinese foothold in the health organizations and the humanitarian organizations across the world. Do you see this happening, or do you think Chinese will have their own model, their own commercial model to make use of this tremendous business venture that we have because of the vaccinations getting more in demand?
China is a very pragmatic nation. They do understand that international or global cooperation is a must for the countries, for the economies of the world to grow. Without that, there would be problem, and serious problem, which may expand from trading to military, geopolitical problems. So I do see that they would appreciate a cooperative attitude from Biden. Already they have welcomed this thing, and they emphasize on the management of these disputes. They believe that in future there would not be any global policeman. There would be a multipolar powers which would manage their affairs, and that is the key solution to the challenges of this 21st century.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adil Najam, Tom, Honorable Ambassador, and Dr. Talit for being here with us. We'll join you next week with another program. Until then, Allah Hafiz.